Oh my God.
Hello.
Comes Kevin.
No, we're not recording yet.
By the way, I'm Cinder. I work on the policy piece.
I see your name.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit, yeah.
So we're ready.
We're ready whenever? Okay.
So are you ready now?
Yeah, let's be ready.
When it's done,
I make time at the present.
see. Presentation.
Okay. I'm gonna do this. Awesome. We're gonna call the special committee on environment resiliency to order. I am Kathleen Sue Andrew, and it is Wednesday, April 9th, 5:30 to 5:34. Can we please take the roll?
Chair Angela,
I'm present.
Vice Chair Sanchez is absent, Councilwoman Anthony,
Present.
Councilman Espinal,
Okay.
Councilor Roy.
Present.
We have 4 present and 1 absent. We have a quorum.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm excited for us to get right into this. I know we've been particularly interested in what happens at the port, and our friends at GZA have been working really hard on the cross-port master planning process and early recommendations. You guys have been doing so much amazing work, it seems like on community engagement and moving us forward. So we were just really excited to welcome you both here today, and Kevin on the screen.
Yeah, Kevin's the principal. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us remotely. And if you don't mind, we would love if you guys wanted to introduce yourselves and then take it away. And actually a question I have, oh, we have to swear you in?
No, well, you have to read.
Read the
item.
agenda item. It's okay.
Can we
It's
please
in
read
red.
item 1 to the agenda
Other than.
for the record?
Update on Cross-Port Master Planning Process and Recommendations. Presentation by consultants from GZA, Kevin Williams and Kurt Spalding.
And Claire, do we need to enter this as an exhibit?
We can do that.
Okay, can we please have a motion to enter this presentation as exhibit 1?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Okay, now we're excited to be here. I'm so excited I skipped the formal part. And a question for you guys start. Do you want us to wait till the end for any questions, or do you want us to flag me down if we have questions? What works best for Kevin?
Kevin, how do you want to handle that? Questions as you go or wait for the end?
Well, so first question I have is how much time should we allot to present?
How much time do you need, Kevin?
I can probably do in 30 minutes.
That's amazing. That sounds perfect.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be quick. There's a lot of content, so if elaboration is needed, go ahead and speak up. But I think for the most part, probably easiest if you reserve your questions till the end. But honestly, if there's something burning, where you really want clarification, please just let me know and I'll pause and answer.
Okay, that sounds great. So we'll let you go through unless there's like a clarifying or urgent thing, and then we'll ask questions at the end. That sounds great. And are you able to share your screen or?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll do that.
You'll do, okay, great, perfect.
And then do you want to introduce yourself, Kevin, and then also
Yeah.
and then get going? Thank you.
Sure. I'll start and then I'll let Kurt and Wayne. So I'm Kevin Williams. I'm principal in charge of planning practice at GZA. And I'm the principal in charge of overseeing the preparation of the master plan for Providence. Wayne, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Wayne Copley. I'm with GCA Norwood, Massachusetts office. I'm vice president, and my role on the team is to help on the community engagement and also to help on the offshore wind market analysis.
And I'm Kurt Spalding, senior consultant at GZA. And my role is to basically help the whole effort be grounded in people we know, people that do know things around this, and given my long tenure in the city and in the state.
Yeah, Kurt really helped out with forming the advisory committee to the master plan, and I came up with the acronym MPACT, because it sounds like impact.
Yeah.
And it's the master plan advisory committee. And it's community stakeholders, folks that are from the area, and they're advising us before we go to the community.
Awesome. Thank you. And for folks who haven't been to the committee before, this is new faces, which makes me so happy. We do always have time for public comment. So there will be time if you want it. And there's a sign-in sheet by the TV. So if you want to sign in, that helps the clerks as well.
Would you like us to firstly introduce the process or introduce the content? Because Kevin could do both.
Why don't we do
Later I can do
process
process.
and then content? I think that'd be
Okay.
helpful to bring us up to
We,
speed. I think,
we should outline what this actually is and
yeah,
especially for everyone. Obviously, this master plan came out of an action by the city council, an ordinance as such. And it called for this process of public engagement, full development of a master plan that is much more than just the economics of making Providence prosper for the years ahead through the term of the lease, but also how the master plan can address community concerns, environmental concerns, sustainability concerns. Back to the point about the advisory committee. We started out with the advisory committee to even think about how to go forward. It was a first stop there, and then we developed meeting the requirement of 4 major public meetings, but also lots of intervening conversations with the advisory committee to help this process address the issues or the full scope of issues that seem to be present around this whole thing. Right now, and I'll turn it to Kevin pretty quickly because he does have a slide on this. But right now, we've done, I think, three as required community meetings. But I, again, want to emphasize the dialogue continues throughout. Those are formal, but there's a lot of informal that helps inform this whole process. So at this point, we've gotten ourselves through the scoping. We've done a lot of work on evaluating issues. And I think that pretty much brings us to the content of where we are. But maybe we should just pause for a minute and make sure everyone's clear about where we are timing wise. We are looking at this whole thing and he'll show a slide on this, but we're looking at a lot of work between now, May, June, July, where the real meat of the plan comes together. And that you're actually going to be one of the first formal bodies that has a chance to actually see some of this meat.
yeah.
It has been shared, some of this was shared at the public meeting last week. So, Wayne, do you have anything to add in there?
No, I think you'll see from the presentation, the process we've been going through. Literally, we started in about March of 2024.
Yeah.
This has been going on for quite a while. This is really the right time to inform you of where we are, as we're just ready to launch into the plan itself.
Let me ask, Kevin, will you introduce the full scope of expertise that was brought to the planning process? I'll let you do that.
I mean, not in the room. I mean, obviously, I've been working with Priscilla, and it relates to the sustainability planning, but I am not familiar with all the members of the commission.
And no, I don't mean the commission so much as our team, Kevin.
Yeah, that was the question that I think some of my colleagues had.
Oh.
Who's on the impact committee? Like who's on?
Oh, yeah.
Like, who's on your team? Yeah.
Kevin, well,
Can he hear us? Sorry.
Well, what I'll do first is I'll show you who's on our team,
Oh,
the
great.
experts. And then the impact committee, we do have a full list of it in
In the
brief.
presentation. Oh,
No, the presentation,
Oh, no.
but on the website,
oh,
providmasterplanner.org. If you go to that website, that has all the history of the planning efforts to date, and it names all the parties involved on the advisory committee.
great.
So when you look at this slide, you see the logos, you see GZA, we're the prime consultant. We've got Civic, who's a local firm that is helping us with the community engagement and community meetings. And then we've got Rhea Consulting. They're a national port planning firm. They're out of Los Angeles, but their principal, Rachel Vandenberg, had worked with us in New England several years ago, studying all the ports in Massachusetts. We brought her on to help us with this plan. And she's done ports on the West Coast and the East Coast. And we just felt like that complements Kevin's local experience.
That's great.
And then Camion is our market analyst. Camion has an office here in Rhode Island. Camion is studying all the economic analysis, what markets are attractive for the profit for the future. And Design Under Sky came to us with Civic. They've been, both those firms have been involved on the public street green way analysis. And Adam Anderson from Design Under Sky is the landscape architect. So he's been kind of the person on the team helping with the greenscape of the port neighborhood.
And just give you a peer at the advisory committee. So, this gives you some of the folks, it's a blend of community members, local interested parties, council members, Espinal and Harris, members from Save the Bay, the People Support, as well as members of Proport tenants, as well as, chairman of Proport have been on. So, very active, very helpful group of individuals that have kept very sustaining conversations with the community and very productive meetings and guidance to put us through the process. So I'll just go ahead and get started. So this is the project area in red dashed. So when we started, the idea is this was a master plan for Proport as came out of the ordinance, but the city of Providence requested that we consider basically the entire area that's formerly considered the Port of Providence, and that this area is basically the maritime industrial waterfront area and abutting elements on Allen's Avenue, and is also coterminous with the infrastructure resiliency planning framework analysis that University of Rhode Island is working on in terms of flood hazard analysis. And so this boundary was sort of determined to be coterminous with that. Now, in the course of this, however, so in this gives you sort of Proport in green, as you can see, is sort of around Narragansett Bay Commission, and then these parcels in yellow are all the industrial uses that are on the Providence River side of Allen's Avenue. And we kind of looked at these more generally because we can't really foster recommendations on Proport's behalf. One of the reasons we are studying this area, though, is potentially areas for expansion of Proport activities and governance, heightened level environmental management, and tenant management that may come out of such things. So we have been asked to do that because Proport is tenanted up right now, and there are continuing opportunities that may provide more jobs and higher and better use of the land, better environmental stewardship of some of the current uses that are present in that so basically north of Proport, Port of Providence area. So this just identifies some of the uses. I'm not going to describe all of them. Happy to go back to this slide. We're of course going to provide it to the commission. So as a context to all of this, one of the key cornerstones of this is, this has long been identified by FEMA as a hazard prone area as it relates to flood hazard risk. And basically I'm sure a lot of folks have seen, the FEMA 100 and 500 year flood maps that overlay this area. What was done is a series of models going out to 2050 that assumed a certain level of sea level rise 2 feet. And we basically evaluated what the inundation water depths would be in those storms. There was also what's called a deterministic model, which is one that was based on a previous storm, the Great Storm of 1938, where we evaluated what if that storm was routed down Providence River and hit full steam today, actually in the 2050 range, what would those inundation levels be? And they're basically similar to the FEMA 100-year that's been advanced through sophisticated modeling from University of Rhode Island. And what you're looking at in yellow is up to 15 feet and even a little bit more in some areas of water above grade level. And, primarily in these areas in north of Proport are ones that don't have seawalls, bulkheading, they have lower lying topography, which is the same thing over here at the southern extent of Johnson and Wales. This is basically the bottom level of the topography of this area. But even, in and around, we're looking at 3 to 6 feet. And this is a worst case storm, so this is kind of a background condition that we carry here. So that gives you a little bit of the background, the nature of the area. Now, the process. So as we indicated, we started with basically this 7-step process, master plan, scoping through marketing, communications, and visioning, which is about deploying the master plan for purposes of identifying funding and transparency with the community and setting 5-year plans that would be, shown to city council and where, uses and sources of funds would be identified. In between that is existing conditions assessment, pivoting to long-range trends and conditions, defining constraints and opportunities, one of which is political change, which is dramatic as it affects this plan and the ability to, roll out certain components in early stages. So it's something we're very mindful of upfront when we started this process. Then using that to develop a series of scenarios or evaluate a series of schemes, and then to coalesce those into an actual master plan framework. And to note this unique aspect of this project and this master plan is basically an environmental master plan, an infrastructure master plan, and a land use master plan allied together, to create community benefits, stimulate jobs, and to provide and secure for sustainable economic and environmental future. Interlaced with those steps are 4 phases of meetings. And as, again, to kind of go back to what Kurt's refrain was, we have community meetings to bring people together, to hear different opinions, to voice those publicly, to have transparency. But in the midst of all of that, we've had individual communications with a number of agencies at the state and the local level. We've had really great discussions with sustainability planning in the city of Providence, integrating components of the comprehensive plan, as well as other, climate justice plans and other goals of the Sustainability Commission, as well as state DOT on their state transportation plan. We've met with DEM. We've met with waterfront groups and NOAA cohort, the People's Port, the working group for the waterfront. So a lot of different parties, and there are many, many more that Kurt's reached out to individually. So the idea is, down to the individual, up to the group, and back again, and a feedback loop in the process. And so meeting 1 was kind of correlated to the establishing the goals of the plan. Meeting 2 was establishing the context based on the existing conditions and trends. Meeting 3 was to sort of present these alternatives, or actually to discuss alternatives, strategies. And then meeting 4 is to sort of coalesce these preferred alternatives and feed them back to the public and get final comment. And we basically had 6 or 5 master plan advisory committee meetings, and we just had our 3rd meeting. We got really great feedback at the last 2 community meetings, which are highly interactive, with applause for the group, everybody that was there giving up their time. So that process has been very positive, but at the end of the day, we have to come up with a good plan. So this is basically the point at which we were at on April 3rd. We are now pivoting into the master plan refinement process. Will take place between May and June, and then June and July, approximately for city council, and then implementation and governance to follow. So now on to sort of the guiding principles as we integrate with other plans. Really the framework here is established by the comprehensive plan, and other plans that have come out over the years in Providence and the state. But about sustainability, resilience, and the environment from the comp plan, these ideas of climate protection, air quality and heat mitigation, so externalities associated with port operations, resource conservation. So about approaching the state's goals in 2050 for net zero emissions, trying to do as much of this as possibly can within the framework of a land use approach that simulates local job creation, economic return, and focuses on creating opportunities from highly skilled to standard sort of labor that it takes to build products and products to serve the public. The other component here is brownfield remediation. This entire area, basically stretching from the downtown along Allen's Avenue to Narragansett Boulevard on the coastal side, has been subjected to a variety of land uses over the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years that have created significant contamination. A lot of this there's been a lot of remediation over past years, including part of Port of Providence or part of Proport as a former landfill, Orsted, which is a tenant that builds offshore wind facilities, has occupied that site, which has been remediated, but not every site has had the same advent. So as a part of our planning here to stem potential for toxic release, to also just clean the land, is to incrementally evaluate ways to remediate as warranted, lot by lot, parcel by parcel over time. And then, you know, the final and kind of underwriting objective of all of this is to really focus on environmental justice and for the frontline neighborhoods, South Providence, Washington Park, and to make a sustainable future with the land uses that are present. You know, and there's a lot to unravel, there's a lot to mitigate, and there's a lot of challenges in that process, but this is what a master plan is all about. Now, one of the things, great input from Priscilla's group. She's really been tremendous in providing guidance on how we need to tie components of the master plan to the goals of, you know, various plans, specifically the comp plan, but, you know, also, you know, climate justice plan in Providence. There's basically three components here that we're focused on. There's a lot of detail that we have that I'm not going to go into on, but meaningful community involvement. And I think you'll see that as I go through the slides. You know, that means collaborative planning. That means, you know, workforce development after it's deployed, education, job opportunities, all allied together, public access and community involvement in the port area. How do we interlace the ability to establish connections to the waterfront from upland communities over time, and to create this truly integrated, you know, sort of light industrial port economy, along with community needs for access to the beautiful waterfront of the Providence River. Phasing out fossil fuels. So the comp plan has already established this. The city is working on with Kevin Proff, his team, to develop, you know, zoning guidance that establishes, you know, what uses can be present, you know, potentially environmental requirements that will be integrated into future zoning, and forms of governance that can establish a healthier future for the land uses in the broader Port of Providence area. Air quality and public health. You know, there's been a lot of study, the community air monitoring study, Brown Breathe Providence study, the on-road study that was done through EPA and DEM. You know, the results of those are showing that there are air toxins. You know, maybe the PM 2.5 does not exceed EPA standards, but there's elevated standards. Basically, the combination of the roadway, the industrial uses, the on-road traffic, you know, create a complicated picture. And the question is, how do we ameliorate that? How do we work through the layers of the onion to identify even those uses that are permitted that may need additional mitigation on their air emissions? So these are the things that we take to heart. From the community standpoint, we've documented each and every comment that we've gotten. In orange here, what you're seeing are comments that came from the Master Plan Advisory Committee. In blue are the community meetings. And I just use this as an example that we've road mapped out all the comments, and a lot of those interlace with the comments from sustainability department. And some of these comments are what you would expect and are common throughout the process. Provide jobs, training, and education, measure and monitor air quality, water health, improve port resiliency. So coming from those, the last set of comments that we had from the community meeting 2, we haven't digested all of community meeting 3 responses and strategies, but that's ongoing. But some of the things that we talked about were, you know, some of the things that we've just talked about: flood risk and resiliency, you know, concerns about chemical release, oil spills. You know, if you have a major weather event, how are those handled? Do you have emergency response in advance? What things can you do to improve the physical facilities in the land to harden these facilities against potential toxic release? How do you prevent chemicals getting released into the air? Water and community access, the same types of stuff. Coastal access, long length of coastline that's unapproachable, and you know, not accessible. Creating dedicated transportation, stronger transportation linkages, increasing wayfinding to uses such as Save the Bay, which is often hard to find at the very end of south of Providence. You know, are there other ways to improve access and enhance the use of that facility and to connect it to the broader pedestrian ecosystem? Hazmat, noise, air quality. So a specific comment from a community member: which operator, which stink? So where are the odors coming from? There's been a lot of work that DEM has actually done on enforcement. There's more work to be done. more work on remediation on that. And obviously, along with that comes air emissions, which are documented in the many studies that have been done, but have not been able to identify or identified yet, potential culprits that might be responsible for some of those air emissions. So the idea is trying to get into, where are these emissions being sourced from, and what sort of emission controls can be placed, and how do we create a stronger regulatory framework to address and redress concerns that the community might have. How do we transparently publicize these things in a way that people find accessible, not having to go to 4 different websites and then go through a dense document that makes little sense to the public? How can that be made more digestible? And of course, how can we make sure the ground is safe from hazardous materials? It goes back to my earlier point. Land use, which is of course a key issue. Some of these specific comments here are greatly elaborated in other areas, but things that we've heard, like a community solar farm present, which is something that Proport is already doing, looking to deploy significant roof solar on one of their warehouses. So they're already engaged in this effort. Transparency of intended uses. That means new tenants that come online. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Do they have safety plans? Do they have health and safety plans? Do they have emergency response plans? Is their regulatory regime, in line with their operations? Concerns regarding displacement, and city role in port expansion. One of the things that we've indicated to the public is there's no plan, and Proport and the city of Providence, no intent to expand the maritime industrial waterfront area, no displacement into residential communities. And if anything, a healthier Proport, higher and better land uses that generate more jobs, can assure that people have jobs in the community, that they will be able to afford to live there in the future, and be assured that their community will remain intact. And then, of course, the general concerns that the maritime industrial waterfront area needs modification to basically follow through with the comprehensive plan. And so zoning framework should be established to assure that future uses are protective of public health and create jobs and are higher and better uses on the lands that are currently underutilized or utilized by uses that are not significantly contributing to the public good. Jobs, economy, and port operations. So the strong desire for the community to have a partnership, a voice in both the use of the community benefit and sustainability funds in port operations, what tenants are coming through, and just basically have a seat at the table somewhere is desired. Youth education programs to bridge work to blue-green economy. And so that's something that's very pivotal in the master plan, is connecting education early, opportunities to go and visit Proport, opportunities to be visited by professionals from Proport, labor unions such as longshoremen, some of the specialized operations that go on. How does Proport operate as a business? There's all great opportunities, for high schools, community colleges, and universities to basically get educated on the opportunities, identify potential jobs, get job training, and basically find avenues into getting work at the port. So that 3-pronged approach is critical to sustaining Proport, sustaining the Port of Providence, sustaining the Washington Park and the South Providence communities. So there's a couple of set of issues here before I get into community-based outreach responses that we've had. So I want you to understand that there's, the Port of Providence that, has no governance over it. Each operator independently operates. A lot of these are legacy uses. They've been there a long time. And the ability to create change, positive change, it takes some more consideration. And then there's Proport and what they're planning on doing in terms of infrastructure and resilience, things ultimately have a community benefit. So broad issues and responses outside of Proport. Zoning controls and environmental standards. Long-term and legacy grandfathered uses need to have some form of oversight, some form of regulations. As a part of that, flood resilience, emergency preparedness and response, individual health safety plans, hazmat release control plans. And a lot of these are already supposed to be provided based on the nature of like petroleum terminals and the adjacency to water, there are already regulatory requirements in place. And the question is, are they being followed through? Near to long range access approach from upland communities to the waterfront. So particularly, there's been obviously work and this ongoing work on several streets to connect upland portions of South Providence. And those are ongoing and continuing. Also, Allen's Avenue itself could benefit from buffering, streetscape enhancement. Most of the uses that are present on Allen's Avenue are exposed. There are ways where you could do revetments. You could do more walls, like at Sims Metal that's present. Although you obviously you see a large amount of that beyond the wall, but trying to improve that corridor over time can make it more attractive to investment, as well as cleaning up the brownfields can help to establish a framework for future investment. Right now, the hurdles are very high. You have contaminated lands, you have ones that aren't particularly attractive from the street, and placing businesses on those, needs general community approach and a sort of development approach that is kind of not coalesced into an action plan. In terms of Proport future land use scenarios, so these are some of the things that Proport is contemplating, and based on our market analysis, are opportunities that are legitimate, that are competitive versus other ports, present opportunities for uses that don't have the types of air emissions that are able to transition over the long run to uses that generate more jobs, reduce fossil fuel production, reduce metal recycling on site, and set a stage where you can have the city, its many great academic institutions, and the working economy of the Port of Providence to create new types of opportunities for great long-term tenants. So obviously offshore wind. Right now we're in a political climate that does not support offshore wind, but there are many, many acres of water leases, out in the Atlantic Ocean that have already been leased and need to be and can be fulfilled, and that do not need additional permitting. So there's years and years of additional offshore wind work, and we look at this at a long range beyond politics and say, the return on investment from offshore wind and the benefit in terms of the energy it generates and the cost it takes to produce is going to be a winner in the long run. And we have a strong base there now with Ørsted. There's other opportunities as well that Proport's identified. So that continues to be, an important part of their future planning for renewable energy. Bulk goods and construction materials. So this is a unique hub given the rail spur, the adjacent to I-95, to continue to provide bulk goods and construction materials to serve the building economy in Providence. And something that there continue to be opportunities are. It's part of the current goods movement that's present at Proport, and it's going to be a very strong market. Energy infrastructure transition. So one of the things, as petroleum gets replaced by more renewable uses, as the 2050 goals for net zero emissions, get to greater fulfillment, you're going to need to, you have an opportunity to potentially reuse some of the infrastructure, meaning the conveyance systems from vessels from the water to the storage utilities that are present, the tanks that are present, to repurpose those potentially for renewable types of fuels, whether it's biodiesel or whether it's hydrogen, fuel. There are emerging and existing options here that have much lesser emissions, have lesser harm to the environment, that might be a transitional use as they're replaced with other uses that generate a lot of jobs and that sort of thing. So that's an opportunity. There's already some of these types of facilities present in the region. Freight logistics and intermodal distribution. So one of the things that's very interesting is with the tariff situation that's going on, what's happened, and I know this because my wife is involved in international textile trade, and what's happened is entities like Amazon are now no longer allowing for direct import, meaning goods are created in China and then go to an Amazon facility and then those are brought into an Amazon warehouse in the United States. They've closed that off because they have to pay the 104% tariff. And to avoid that, they're now making all the manufacturers basically be responsible for their own imported goods, and they have to pay the duties individually on them. And what that's going to do is redistribute the logistics network and the intermodal distribution network. So you're going to have various good streams coming in the United States. Those have to be combined in the warehouse, packaged, and then sent out. So this creates a unique opportunity to fulfill basically a gap in international shipping. But regardless of how things peter out over the next 10, 15, 20 years, this is a critical infrastructure aspect where goods get mixed, they get shipped out. You can use the rail spur. You don't have to use, heavy duty trucks to get to a regional distribution system. So that is an opportunity. Cold storage warehousing is at a premium throughout the United States. There are things like pharmaceuticals that have to be refrigerated, could potentially be something like fish that has a fish extension or market that has to be extended. There are a lot of different types of frozen commodities that cold storage warehousing could take advantage of and where you could get a premium. So those are some of the duller versions of things that could be done, some of the commodity-based movement types of things that could be done, all very valuable for regional economy, all job creating, all high return on investment. Roll on and roll off goods is something that they already do on PropPort. So the heavy machinery and equipment that gets imported or exported can take advantage of the deep water berth that's present. But some of the very unique and interesting things, given the amount of academia and the important like aquaculture that's present in the Providence River and Rhode Island in general, are some of the elements, and those are all kind of allied, staging for high value, high tech manufacturing that focus on industries such as ocean technology, robotics, renewable energy, and are driven by the establishment of innovation hubs and partnerships with educational institutions. That creates a very interesting opportunity with an environmentally friendly footprint, put in the business of environmentally friendly manufacturing, environmentally friendly technology creation. And a part of this as well, given offshore wind, there's a unique aspect here that you have a life cycle for wind. Wind turbines need to be repaired. Wind turbines need to be modified. Wind turbines need to be advanced, the latest technology. Wind turbines need to be recycled and reused. So you can create this circular economy at PropPort, on lands that used to manufacture wind turbines, to repurpose them or to reprogram them for modern technology. And the last piece of this is also very relevant given the academic, capabilities in the Providence market, is a blue economy research and development incubator. This has been done in a lot of ports in the United States, particularly on the western coast, Port of San Diego. Blue economy research and development incubators focus on marine biotechnology, oceanographic research, renewable energy, aquaculture, marine agriculture, and marine resource management. And as we look at, the interesting thing here is creating, potentially broader schemes to stem sea level rise and coastal climate related conditions. That requires deployment of know-how, technology, and physical appurtenances in the water, whether they're ballasts, whether they're natural shoreline components, whether they're things that stem the flow of wave energy. So there may be an opportunity here as Providence and as the state of Rhode Island try to harden their environment from coastal flooding to use this as a place to launch the manufacturing and the technology needed to address those conditions. Okay, so beyond that, some of the other components that PropPort is looking that all provide an element of community benefit. These are all sort of near to long range projects, but are part of the plan beyond this sort of land use transition. Port electrification. So one of the key things that PropPort is looking at, and it has to be done in steps and based on funding availability and the transition of global realities for goods movement, both the cargo vessel side and the trucks that convey material from the port onto the roadway systems, is shore power. So shore power allows for diesel vessels while they're alighting, and they do for multiple days while they're unloading, to be able to plug in to electricity so they do not have to sit there and burn diesel fuel while they're idling. That is one of the major sources of air quality emissions in the United States, whether it's recreational cruise ships or whether it's cargo vessels. So that's one of the things that they'll be looking at, moving into the future, as well as equipment, whether it's front end loaders, whether it's diesel trucks converting to hydrogen fuel or to electric vehicles, or whether it's crane activities. All of these things, these technologies are emerging to transition. Right now, Propport's looking at trying to secure, or enter a grant for an electric crane, to kind of set the stage in this. Electric vehicle charging stations. And the unique aspect of all of this, beyond HVAC and lighting systems, all of those are within reach. The unique aspect of this is you have wind turbines present on site, right, that are already producing energy. You have the opportunity to place a resilient location for battery energy storage that can capture that renewable energy from both solar rooftops and from wind turbine use to power onshore power systems. So there's almost a way to have a closed loop system here. And this is how you get to net zero. Now, I'm not going to say this is going to happen in 10 or 15 years. This has got to be funded by state and federal private sources, and it has to happen incrementally. But there are demonstration projects, there's specific equipment, there's possibility to incrementally do onshore power over time. But this is one of the components that any modern port is looking to do, and has been started in many, many ports that we've examined. This next section is climate change resilience. So the first step here, and some of this has already been done by URI, are vulnerability assessments. Where are your electrical and HVAC systems located? Do you have vulnerable systems or material that's below the flood elevation? What sort of things, the other part is emergency response plans. What happens, 10 days out when a huge storm is coming? Are there ways to move petroleum off-site? Are there ways to harden individual facilities? Are there ways to move chemicals off-site that might currently be stored? Are those chemicals already raised above a flood elevation? So there should be individual emergency response plans, as well as collaborative, organized, campus-wide Port of Providence emergency response plans that work together. So that's the first step. Some of the other steps kind of into the long range are building scale resiliency requirements. So you start with building, and then you have site. So elevating electrical equipment, caustic material handling, elevated above flood elevation, barriers and dikes around fuel tanks were identified as vulnerable based on their elevation and their storage capacities. Storm resistant backup systems. So, some of these systems, if the electricity goes down, there are issues that can happen in terms of, containment and that sort of thing that may have to be looked at. So the idea in the vulnerability assessment is to look at having this type of backup systems that can still supply power to the region, where, emergency response plans can assure that the fueling that's needed that comes from the Port of Providence is still available and is moved off-site potentially to, if people are familiar with Hurricane Sandy, the New York City environment was cut off from gasoline, was cut off from fuel for weeks. Gas prices soared. Lines to fuel your cars, went for a mile. So the idea is, a good portion of the Port of Providence powers South Rhode Island. And so how do we, while we're identifying ways to transition those uses over time, we need to make them resilient. We need to make sure they stay online and they're available during an emergency. Site-wide stormwater management approaches. Because this entire site is within a 100-year flood zone and is looking at inundation levels that are extreme, we have to take a number of approaches here. One is detention, retention, so combined, being able to store water that's incoming. And really, it's more designing for a 30-year storm than a 100-year storm, because a 100-year storm needs resolution beyond what you're able to do on the land. You need to have a statewide approach to a storm that focuses on different types of techniques and approaches, whether it's barriers, gates, baffles in the water, on the Providence River, to be able to handle the magnitude of storm that's predicted from these forecasts. So, but there are things you can do like bioswales, having more permeable surface. Almost all of Provport is impermeable. And being able to treat that water as it runs off. So a series of systems incrementally applied, tenant by tenant, site by site, over time, can build this sort of interim practical upland climate change resilience. Then long range approaches are flood elevation grade changes, seawall elevation, building design flood elevation, meaning raising the building or dry flood proofing the building so that water doesn't intrude, or where possible doing wet flood proofing, which means the water flows through the building. There are no vulnerable structures where water intrusion would occur, and it's able to flow in and around the building. That not all these solutions may be practical, but you have to look at all of these tools in the toolbox. And then the last point I made, long range solution has got to be a comprehensive approach for Providence River. You cannot achieve full resiliency or even partial resiliency by just looking at upland techniques. The last section here is environmental governance, air quality and noise monitoring inside the fence line of Provport, mitigation applied as identified and warranted. So Provport has committed to doing, right now, all of these studies have been done on the corridor. None have been done inside, the actual fence line, whether it's a Port of Providence or whether it's Provport. So trying to identify, okay, are there emitters inside the Port of Providence that need additional mitigation on their air emissions? So the idea is we need to do some more study inside the fence line, and maybe over time, that's kind of live monitoring that you can tell, if there's peaks and valleys in seasons, if Narragansett Bay is cleaning their tanks, is that causing emissions? Are there things that are going on other portions of the site that seasonally don't happen other times of the year? Just trying to get to the bottom of that full life cycle, what sort of emissions are going on, and what may be responsible for what. The other key component hand in hand with that is environmental auditing, of tenants, so finding out if they're compliant, is everything in order? Do they have these records, potentially making them publicly available? And then I mentioned this earlier, incremental hazardous materials investigation remediation program. So as new tenants come online, basically do a phase one. Phase two is warranted, you do a phase two, you do some drilling, some sample points, you see what's under the ground, then you develop mitigation. Use federal EPA funds. So Providence a nonprofit. It's eligible for EPA brownfield grants, as is the city of Providence. Take advantage of those. And the last portion is disclosure. As we research and evaluate more into the future, have these public. Let people know that you're responding, what time frame you can respond. If there's an emergency, you let the public know. So now the last portion of this is about really the community-based responses. Those are things that we recommend for Provport, that we've discussed with them, that we've recommended for the Port of Providence writ large, that need to be discussed further with the city. But I think they're practical, common sense things. And the question is, what sort of framework can we establish to make them happen? So for the community, we basically all that comment list that I showed has gotten distilled down to basically these 8 areas: environmental impacts and public health, waterfront community access, job creation, education and training, transparency, community involvement, and sustainability and resilience, land use and zoning. Of those, land use and zoning, sustainability and resilience, we kind of broke out. Those are things that need to occur, whether community benefits or sustainability funds need to be applied. And I've discussed some of these already. Vulnerability assessments, prioritizing spill prevention, control and countermeasure, plan compliance. So SPCC is actually required for port uses. So those should be in place. The question is, are they up to snuff? Are they compliant? Developing emergency response and storm preparedness, compliance with comp plan and future zoning, no displacement of existing residences, transparency and intended land uses of existing parcels and property acquisitions, using EPA brownfield assessment grant opportunities to both identify contamination, have a plan, in place for the future, which basically allows you to set up an RFP to redevelop land in the future and remediate those sites and use the significant funds that are available to make that happen. And ultimately be able to transition to new market opportunities with higher and better use where the land is more attractive to private investment. Okay, so some of the stuff that we discussed with the community. So environmental impacts and public health, waterfront community access, job creation, education, training, transparency, and community involvement. And the environmental mitigation and public health realm. This again dovetails with everything we say. They desire expanded air quality monitoring to target clearer equipment upgrades that will make meaningful impacts on the environment. This is basically word for word from one of the comments we got. Proport intends to do that. Installing noise and light monitors near residential areas around the port. You know, you have nighttime activities, you have different activities going on in terms of noise. The metal recycling activities generates a lot of noise when you're, you know, dumping steel into containers and taking them to the port, you know. So looking at these, you know, may not have constant droning and noise, but maybe intermittent noise that impacts most adjacent communities. Is, you know, identify those and then come up with solutions to resolve them. That really takes annual monitoring to target the operations that are occurring that might be causing these types of issues. None of those was heavily mentioned by the community, but it's been mentioned in various forums over time. Work with the city to establish truck routes around South Providence. So apparently the city has attempted to do this before. We actually have laid out a truck route plan. Now, the one thing that's common sense here is there's really only one way in or out, you know, to Proport, and the highway is right there. But the idea is to sign this, you know, potentially long range solutions for more direct access to I-95 as the port grows, you know, truck route lanes, anti-idling laws that are enforced, anti-idling requirements that are enforced at Proport. So that's something to be looking at. And then publishing a community safety and emergency response plan. So putting them on the website, preparing them, making sure they're deployed, making sure somebody coordinates those citywide, and, you know, particularly at the Port of Providence. Wayfinding access, port buffering. So approve signage, creating public access points, continuing support of the existing spaces, expanding walking paths along the Providence River, and partnering with local colleges and universities to create educational opportunities about the Providence River ecosystem. So one of the things that we did here, working with Adam at Design Under Sky, is develop a concept framework here in terms of work that's going on and how this might look holistically. One is the spine, Allen's Avenue and Narragansett Boulevard. It's not, you know, real great to drive down that street. You got the rail line in the middle of the road. You got no street trees. You got no buffering. You know, the roads, you know, the sidewalk accessibility and that sort of thing. It's not a great walkable street, nor is there really reason to be, because the destination is all the way down at Save the Bay. But potentially making a sort of trail that connects to the waterfront, you know, and connects Public Street and Oxford, you know, creating little outlets that over time can be developed, you know. And as some of these uses, you know, some other cities like New York City, even in industrial waterfront areas, is required publicly accessible waterfront areas. So while waterfront gets developed, you have to provide access on the waterfront so you can redevelop it over time. But the only way you can do that is create launch points, you know, connections, you know, from upland communities to the Providence River. Now, the main aspect of this is, you know, you have Ernest going into Shipyard Street. You know, this is really outside of Proport, this area, and goes into the Johnson Wales campus. You know, you also have Columbia Park, and you have the field's name, Bennett Field, and you have this open field here, and you have Columbia Park. You know, it's a great opportunity to kind of connect through this and to use what is now a very improved streetscape along Johnson and Wales to connect. There's a pedestrian path that connects here on the waterfront, and as well, you know, try to transition some of the land uses here, more strongly buffer this area, and to put, you know, like sort of softer light industrial office uses that are water supported, water dependent along Shipyard Street, and to push the more active industrial uses to the waterfront. So the idea is to buffer this and to use the natural resources that are already present to create launching pads to get to your trail, you know, so bikers and residents can, and then also you provide a connection here to your commercial street that can sort of enliven that connection. And you could have little kiosks that tell the story of how, you know, this area has transitioned over time. So again, small gestures that over time make a cumulative impact is the kind of setup that we're looking at. So workforce development and job creation, I think Proport is already looking to provide a job center, like a training center location, so helping the city build and run a port workforce training center that covers all the types of industries that are currently there, their representatives, at the foundation level, coordinating with high schools, creating, active practical training programs with them. When I was in school, and I know a lot of schools already do it, there's opportunities to work and to go to school and to get some practical training, and learn a trade or a skilled element or a high-tech, component that's related to port operations, and to create career paths and interests, keep families in Providence, and, great benefit to Providence residents, and to represent the diversity of Providence. That starts at the high schools and community colleges and universities. And then providing access to full-time union membership. That's done by getting young adults exposed to the career paths that are present. Now, part of that is job boards, job fairs, these types of things, regular touches in the community, and, really rooting this from the educational to the training stand, and then providing the opportunities to the jobs, by very least posting them on the Proport website. Part of this, of course, technology changes, land use change, industry changes, making sure that the Port of Providence and Proport, for their own interests as well as the city interests, are in coordination with these type of elements, providing for upskilling of emerging technologies, whether it's learning how to repair an electric crane, whether it's learning how to maintain, an onshore power system, whether it's learning how to, operate automated, technologies in warehouses. And then, the background behind all this is Providence jobs, community jobs, and using this to maintain and expand the diverse workforce. The last underwriting component of all of this is transparency, community involvement, and enforcing regulations. So one of the things that Proport and the community have discussed in the many meetings is having a dedicated community liaison role at Proport that's paid, that basically serves as a communicator with the public. Chris Watterson is constantly at meetings, and he's done a great job of that. Being able to be responsive to the community members, and having somebody that can provide information regularly and liaison with a community member and a community group. And so we also recommend the establishment of some form of community environmental port group. There's multiples out there already. Having them have, advisory role to the board, having them have potentially an office, where they can, work with the city, or members that can work with the city. We think that creates a nice balance. And that basically prioritizes inclusive decision-making, ongoing public meetings. So, whether it's biannual on a state of the port, that where community members and port members can get together and talk about how they've achieved objectives of the plan, and what's left to be done, and the third part of this is having the community to be able to commune with the Sustainability Commission and Parks Commission on, having some skin in the game about how funds get utilized and applied. And then behind all of this is sharing environmental and health oversight data for the betterment of the community, and to show that the master plan is achieving its goals. So I'm not going to go into all of this. There's a lot of information about things that we've already heard about how the reserve accounts would like to be used. Some of these are just natural hazard mitigation, climate resilient infrastructure, fossil fuel use, reducing carbon dioxide. So programs that will do this, there have been a lot of, and we'll have more on this that we'll share, that came out of strategies from the last meeting about how to meet some of these issues and goals that the community would like to prioritize. So that would, whether we send you a brief on what we have distilled from the last meeting, we can do that. So the last thing I wanted to note here is just to let you all know, and the community know, that the Providence Eye is sponsoring Providence Port Day. It's an all-day event on May the 17th from 8 to 4 p.m. That's going to talk about the history of the port and the future of the port, environmental concerns, economic development concerns, and touch a lot of, kind of be a capstone to this process, and where community members can sit down and roundtable with experts and other members of the community, to share information and to come together on this day to understand what the port is doing and how it's operating and how it intends to operate. So that's all I have. So I went a little.
It's a lot.
Thank you, Kevin.
That was a-
I assume there are questions. I have many, but do committee members have questions before I jump in?
or comment on this.
Yeah, go
start.
for it.
Thank you so much. I think this was so impressive. Comprehensive, the plan, at least what I was envisioning was for the master plan, this is certainly achieved all my hopes. At least, how it's highlighted here in the report. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I'm just thrilled that for some reason I thought it was just going to be a Providence. The master plan for Providence and the fact that you are including the parcels that are not part of Providence as, possible or maybe potential new tenants for Providence, if we were ever to extend that, I think is really important. So I'm very, very happy to see that because we're all concerned about the properties that are not within Providence. I mean, not that we don't have concerns about Providence, but
Sure.
you're moving or planning is making us feel, at least me, feel a lot more confident that Providence will run well. But it's the properties that aren't in Providence that I'm really concerned about. So I just love the fact that that this master plan is contemplating the expansion of Providence. I guess I just, I don't know, I have so many little things. I think I might just, the one thing I did want to ask, and I don't know if anyone can answer the question. So my understanding is that one of the vacant parcel or an available parcel was for sale, and that was it Sims Metal that purchased it?
Imagine census for sale.
No,
Yeah, we haven't heard
there's a
that.
parcel that Sims might buy.
I'm sorry, there's already a transaction that's taken place.
I heard Sims is buying a property.
Okay, so.
That's
Yeah.
correct. So
Yeah.
so I'm wondering how that's possible. I know when I read it in the news, I was like, what?
Well, I
How
think
did
that characterizes the way things work down there.
Could you characterize that? I just.
I mean,
don't
I
know.
think there are sales that go on. For example, the owner of the Rhode Island Recycled Metals, they had bought property to the north.
That's
here,
what it
here. Yeah.
Yep.
I think your point about Providence being able to grow around this plan and to be able to go in and aggressively look to buy property, that seems to be a big goal of Providence itself and water.
I have to say that should be even greater impetus to light a fire in the city of Providence to change the zoning as soon as
Yeah, I was
possible.
I'm glad Kevin
I was
popped in there
gonna say
because
that
I don't know
next.
that word very well,
Yeah,
but he does.
Yeah, I mean, that is disconcerting. I had not heard this news.
so I'm just gonna ask, I mean, so I can only imagine that there's talk that's the properties never publicly become available for sale. And so
Well,
it
right.
seems to me like there's deals being made.
Yeah, that's sold to the owner of the recycled metals.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
And that happened in a very quiet way.
Yeah.
I think Rhode Island DOT is either take on a long lease or purchase property there. The community seems to know a lot of this, and they're very concerned.
So just to follow up on the zoning, because this is very timely, because we are going to be
Yeah,
that tranche of zoning, proposed zoning regulations are probably going to address this.
Will you be,
And Kevin, you're still sharing your screen. If you want to unshare your screen, we can see like your desktop and stuff.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, but then we'll get to see your face bigger if you stop.
yeah, so the quick question, Kevin, is that one way or another, either formally or informally, I presume zoning that would align with the plan
Yeah.
could be recommended to you at
That
some
would
level.
be really helpful.
And I'm
Yeah, we've
very
discussed.
circumspect about it because I'm not quite sure how that all will work.
Well, here's what I would
Positive way.
suggest, and you know, zoning already knows this. You know, we had discussed components like environmental performance standards. And you know, there are a lot of districts that I work in that have very heightened performance standards on air, noise, odors, and other components that have regimes of special permits and conditional use permits and that sort of thing. Providence does not really have such a setup in a P&Z board framework to sort of effectively make, you know, potential land uses subject to such provisions. And so part of the issue I would say is, you know, there's certain uses that are identified in the comp plan that were to be strictly restricted in terms of either expanding or rolling out new uses. I would think that I would focus on that piece immediately to expedite the types of uses that you want to exclude in the future, which is a relatively simple, you know, zoning text change. Obviously, processes for zoning text or zoning map changes are cumbersome and time consuming. And then later on down the road, if there's means or mechanisms for adding environmental performance standards for uses that are uses that, you know, may on their face seem to have negative environmental consequences, but could perform with, you know, very strongly controlled, you know, means or measures that are subject to, you know, actual demonstration. You know, maybe this is not a city of Providence responsibility, maybe it's something that DEM could do, but effectuating something like a port overlay district in the future. But I would start with step one to try to identify the list of permitted uses as soon as you can to stop, you know, what is basically the exacerbation of uses that have not performed well in the past. So.
Kevin, sorry if I.
No, that was good. Thank
Would
you.
you be able to send us, or anyone who you gave some of the examples that you just gave from other
Yeah.
places that have these more performance-based zoning standards? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, 100%. I'll have. I actually have narrative that I'll in a document that I can send. You know, probably tomorrow. That outlines some of these. Yeah.
Thank you. That was one of my big questions.
Yeah.
Like, now that we're going to do the zoning next, what do you recommend? Yeah.
Well, what this speaks to is a highly coordinated strategy around what you're talking about, Councilman, where you want something to happen, but you got to align all the levers, and that has not happened today. I mean, that just hasn't really been tightly put together. But to achieve so much of what Kevin talked about, I think that's essentially the magic that's going to have to be developed here, and a lot of coordination between city, Rockport, and to some degree the community. I think the community isn't as aware as Kevin is of what's happened elsewhere
Yeah.
and the tools they really do have. They're not as, for example, I worked in Boston. I watched what happened in Chelsea, and they have pocket parks right within their port area. Chelsea Collaborative, which is sort of the citizen group, but bigger and stronger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Boston just recently developed a port overlay district that has performance standards. All of New York City has basically an M1 zone, M1 to M1-3 that has significant performance standards. One of the things I was going to note, you know, you got to be able to raise capital to make changes. And, you know, I had discussed this, you know, this is just an idea. You know, you've done a redevelopment plan for this area, multiple redevelopment plans. And one of the things that unlocks is the ability to do a tax increment finance district.
Yeah.
And through a tax increment finance district, you could finance things like resiliency. You could finance things like funds to focus on brownfield cleanup. You know, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but a redevelopment plan also effectuates the ability to do eminent domain. You know, so there are tools here to effectuate change. It just that the complicated will. You know, I'm working on a redevelopment plan in Rhode Island right now, and you know, so this is a tool that's been used. It's been used in large areas, and obviously the effectiveness of it is in proper management and planning. Like, can your bond be supported by the tax increment? But here, where you have a lot of wealthy, tenants, or ones that effectively do very, very well, and are causing certain environmental externalities, or at least perceived environmental externalities. Putting a tax increment on them to affect positive change seems like a reasonable thing. So that's one avenue there.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Did you have questions?
Yeah, apologies in advance for my ignorance on this, but could you just explain I just forget it, the standards, performance standards.
Yeah.
And what happens when a tenant doesn't meet those standards?
Yeah, so it's in New York City, performance standards are part of the zoning resolution. And so, and I do a lot of zoning work in New York City, a lot of special permit work. And the idea is they're very strictly identified emissions tests that, for instance, say you have a factory that has multiple emission permits for metal processing. And, generally what happens is that you have a Department of Health or a DEP that regulates those permits. And the problem is with such a permitting regime is those are not subject to ambient air monitoring, right? They're subject to capacity limitations based on the assumed emissions created by whatever use is present. And then you basically have capacity limitations on the building. This stuff is all done by modeling. It's not done by live monitoring, right? So the problem with and I'm kind of answering your question in an oblique way here, because it is complicated to put these performance standards and to have enforcement. But generally, if you know that you have an emitter that is likely emitting, harmful emissions, and a lot of communities have very aggressive ones where literally you cannot emit particulate or volatile organic compounds beyond the fence line. So say somebody is identified as doing this, they basically are given a notice to cure. You have 90 days to put in emissions controls and do lot line monitoring that demonstrates that those emissions are no longer occurring. If they do not cure it, then they are then fined. If they do not cure it by the next round, they lose their certificate of occupancy. So that's just an example. Now the problem here, and I want to discuss the practicality of this just briefly, because the regime you have to have in place, or the organization that you have to have in place at a municipal level, is significant. You have to have a board that can review land use applications for uses that seek to operate with emissions. So, and they would need to be reviewed outside reports on the air quality emissions or the noise emissions or whatever. And they would have to demonstrate for preliminary and final site plan approval process at your zoning board that they meet these goals. And then the board would vote on whether or not to, to accept the application. It's basically a discretionary action, right? So you have to have the board that has the sort of wherewithal to review that. You have to have an enforcement regime backed up at the local level that, if you have a complaint, it gets lodged, that has to be verifiable, so somebody in the community would have to do some monitoring and say, hey, we think we have a compliance issue here. They'd have to have a process of redress. It's like almost a quasi judicial process, so, but I will say this, these things come with fees. If you want to apply for a use that's perceived as negative and you want to operate in a responsible fashion, you have to pay for the studies that demonstrate that. You have to come back in for compliance to renew your permit every few years, demonstrate that you're operating effectively. So there's a lot. This is why I indicated, delimit the land uses first that you want, the types of use groups or the types of land uses that are acceptable, and then try to work over the long range, whether it's a partnership with DEM or whether it's something that the city decides to do, that along with your variances that people issue, there's special permit, conditional permits that are subject to heightened scrutiny. You know, I'm for this because industrial uses are able to become cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. The technology is out there. You know, it's possible to commune, you know, types of land uses that, you know, even a concrete factory, you know, the control systems that are present on that can be present at the highest levels are literally you could get zero emissions of particulate, you know, at the lot line. Asphalt, I actually represented a town that, you know, wanted to limit an asphalt facility from that had a variance from the 1970s, and they were looking to expand it, you know, and we established a regime of things that they would need to do, and they were going to put in the highest best technology, demonstrated that it worked. But we're like, well, we're not going to trust this. You're going to have to do post monitoring at peak emissions, you know, 90 days, within 90 days, and demonstrate the fence line that you're meeting the goals that you've indicated you've modeled, you know. So it's, you know, this is a complicated thing. You know, but you know, this goes back to the importance that I said is you have a lot of infrastructure here that is concerning given its adjacency to residential neighborhoods, you know, and you have the combined I-95 and Port of Providence that's next to residential neighborhoods making a cumulative effect. But you also have very important infrastructure that's serving, heating people's homes, fueling people's vehicles. You know, liquefaction assures that homes in cold winters stay warm. You know, this stuff is important. It's hard to move. And, you know, if you can create an environmental program that assures these things that operate safely, I think that's an important avenue to look at. So anyway.
Thank you. And I think Councilman Roy has another question.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if this, and if I'm gonna make sense here, Kevin, but I think one of the issues I heard in terms of like enforcement around performance standards is if you have, multiple tenants who, the pollution that comes from their industries are very similar, they kind of engage in this blame game. It's not me, it's them. And so how does a technology capture who's doing what exactly? Like who's the tenant that's actually polluting?
Yeah, I mean, and that, listen, there's a way to get to the bottom of everything. You know, they're like the air quality monitor equipment that's placed out there is sort of, I'm not going to call it cheap. It's inexpensive, and it's sort of, but there's sophisticated air monitoring. You can literally put monitoring on the rooftop near the pipe emissions and do what's called an air dispersion model. And you know, basically you can tell exactly what's coming out of that emission, at what rate, at what speed, how much, what density. And basically based on all of those parameters, you can determine where is that dispersing to, you know. And the thing is, as a quasi judicial process, you know, the onus is on, you know, the emitter to demonstrate that they're not emitting. And the easiest way to do that is to go to the pipe that's emitting from the rooftop and perform the air quality monitoring and do a dispersion analysis and demonstrate it. So yeah, it can be done. But I mean, listen, and PropPort, there are many different unique uses. I don't think you have that issue. On the petroleum tanks, yes, you know, there could be a slow leak. There could be improper containment. There could be something about the conveyance of fuel from seaside vessels to the tank that, you know, that's causing some sort of release or some sort of emission, or somebody doesn't have some treatment system on something. But, you know, proximity and, you know, targeted testing at the point of emissions, it can get you more and more clues to it. But you have pointed yourself to, you know, you can't, you can get into a battle of forms going back and forth on such things. And I'm not going to acknowledge that this doesn't get complicated. And, you know, like I've been on both sides, you know, of, you know, both, you know, industrial emissions and communities, and seen that it's often a very difficult process to get to the bottom of. But, you know, and that's one of the other things that it's important, you know, if you curate, you know, members on a planning and zoning board, you either have outside counsel on such a matter, in general, like by outside counsel, I mean legal counsel, I mean outside consultants, that somebody has to pay for that. The city shouldn't have to pay for that. Generally the party that's seeking a permit or seeking to redress a complaint has to pay for that. But this is why this is complicated. It has to have a lot of thought. It has to have a lot of construction, and honestly, you're not going to you're not going to be able to sort of have foresight and understanding on every single type of application. You're going to run into things that are going to create original thinking and how are we going to resolve this? So, yeah.
Well, I have a few, you guys,
I'm all set.
I'm all set.
I have a few, and then, just so folks know, if you're looking for, the committee always asks questions first, so I totally see you with your hand up, but we'll get there. I am wondering, so I always get to the and I know you guys aren't done with the plan yet, but I'm always like, what are we gonna do about this? Who are we thinking will be in charge of implementation? Because there's so many plans that exist that are so great, and then it's like, then they sit on a shelf and get dusty. So do we need like a project manager? Who's in charge of doing this? Like, how do we get it done?
Well, Chris right now is thinking about that. I've had other meetings, GCA's had meetings. He's starting to get his head around the scope of what's going to be required. A lot of it is, as Kevin said, you're gonna have to have some kind of tracking of performance through the plan. I think what's really important though is you have short, long, medium, and long.
Yeah.
So you're not sort of expecting things that are really hard to happen in a month or a year or even 5 years. And you have all this transition going on around us. Needless to say, what's happening in Washington affects this.
Yeah.
Some of the economic scenarios or port market scenarios matter a lot right now.
Yeah.
So, implementation firstly lies with Providence and Waterson, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think there's also things the city's gonna have to line up and do.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The great thing is you already have a framework. There's 5-year plans. It's got to go, to council, but what I had elaborated in this sort of governance framework, and this is the big bugaboo. Everybody hates attorneys. Everybody should hate planners because things don't get implemented sometimes, I guess. As part of my self-loathing as a planner is just seeing a lot of long-range plans sit on the shelf, and the focus isn't on governance. But here you already have a framework for feedback loop, right, to the city. The other aspect here that we're recommending in this governance structure is to have a community liaison. Maybe that person's paid. We also have the City of Providence Planning Commission, and I think we need, somebody on the city side, project manager. Then I think Proport, as a part of the community liaison, maybe that dedicated position is like master plan implementer, and they need to be, able to report annually, and progress needs to be sort of simulated, and maybe we can develop some sort of report card, that assesses this. But I think to Kurt's point as well, listen, long range plans change. The ground under us has shifted more dramatically than I would have ever intuited. And when we laid out our proposal for this project, we actually put in political and governmental change because we saw it coming. Little did we know it's so dramatic that really creative solutions need to be thought of here. So the one way that you don't point fingers is you're constantly sharing information and practical realities are being done. But I would recommend, you already have this framework in place, where the capital program at Proport and what's being done is tied, to the master plan. Then we're recommending a reporting structure where there's a community liaison and a dedicated Proport person basically going to be in charge of implementing, and then a reporting mechanism to city council, whether that's annual or biannual. That's something that I think, with you, with Director Mulligan, with the community groups, that we need to agree on some sort of evaluation framework, that we can literally target the implementation, of the program over time. And I think it's going to become more effective to do that as we distill things into And I've already sort of done this on a lot of these programs. We're still kind of working through the nuances of it, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, year elements and goals. And a part of this as well is the reporting that we've indicated, the transparency, the public disclosure, on a website that basically tracks the master plan. So I think all of these are in the soup, and we just need to codify this into an agreement between the city, community members, and Proport in a way that's not, like hanging a weight over the entire thing. Something that just practically works. And that's really the balance of this, because we don't want to be chasing the requirements all the time. We want to be implementing the plan, and those sound like the same thing, but they're not. If you're constantly worried about being regulated and challenged on things, it can really, you're not maybe focusing on the solution. So, having a deft, and flexible sort of approach that involves the members and basically continues this dialogue, and, has proper reporting and goal setting is, I think, a key part of the plan, and something that I think in the next few weeks we'll have a stronger outline based on our output, because we've already developed this to some extent, way beyond the detail that we provided.
Okay, that's really
So
helpful.
one theme that's emerging out there in the world of governance is how you use data,
Yeah.
how you use artificial intelligence, how you use things that made things very expensive in the past to be much less expensive now.
Yeah,
Because this is all gonna be data. Data is getting cheaper and cheaper. Programming is getting cheaper and cheaper.
yeah,
You can build tools that allow inexpensive or much less inexpensive ways to aggregate data and project it out. And that's the biggest problem,
yeah,
or used to be.
yeah.
We need to take advantage of that, kind of across the board in environmental management, but this is an opportunity showing here.
Yeah, no, this is really exciting. I'm gonna say one final thing, and then I know we still have Kevin, and it's getting late, so I don't wanna Kevin is family, we wanna get the final presentation, but my only other thing, which is more just a note, is when you were talking about cold storage, just as a note, I don't know if you've been in touch with the other major port in Rhode Island, Point Judith, but I know they had at some point some constraints around cold storage, particularly for the fishing industry.
Yeah.
And
So
a lot of the fish is frozen and shipped to China, and with all the retaliatory tariffing happening, that could be an opportunity.
no, very, very good. I actually looked at that as well. And, actually Director Mulligan asked that we look at fish, like refrigerated storage, fish processing to sort of expand that
Yeah.
market. And I let him know there were a lot of externalities associated with that,
Yeah.
both odors, rats,
Rats.
vectors, and that sort of thing. So and then in addition, as well as the type of vessels that pull up, we're talking about tug-sized, vessels that have very different berthing needs, seawall heights, gangways, and that sort of thing that are very different than what's present. So I think we are kind of pivoting to a different type of cold storage, but that's a good point. Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay, and
we-
Dan Costa, just so you guys know, you probably met him, but Dan Costa is the Point Judith Port Manager for
Yeah.
DEM, and we know all about every ship.
yeah, I was gonna say, we
all that.
have a lot of experience in the region too, over in Bedford also.
Yeah.
Had a lot to do with that when I was.
Yeah.
chief administrator. His externalities term understates the challenge
Yeah.
with fish processing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you brought it up. I made sure that I researched those when you mentioned, by the
Yeah,
way.
there's a social dynamic with that too, that's very
Yeah.
challenging.
So,
Well, it's just cutting fish is a really.
yeah, and a lot of it, anyway, we freeze most of our fish whole and ship it to China, but.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a storage import idea that fishes that are coming in, but who knows about import now?
Yeah, as I'm saying, we ship most of our overseas. Anyway,
Fish is going up.
we're, okay, any other council questions? Okay, we're gonna hear from Kevin, and then we're gonna do public comment, don't worry, we totally will do public comment.
I'm gonna have to leave because I've gotta-
Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah, I gotta go visit, my wife's in the hospital. So I can go see her. See you in a bit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Kevin.
job, sir.
Thank you for being here, Kevin, we appreciate you.
Thank you all.
And then the other Kevin. Yes, we go here first. Yeah, do you guys need to get out of here? Yeah, can we just do public comment now? Can we, okay, do I have to take a motion to move it? Okay, can I have a motion to move agenda item 3?
Second.
First, second, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Set motion, second,
I seconded it.
and then we all voted in favor. Cool, public comment, and if you could state your name out loud, and then, say your comment.
Okay, my name is Lonnie Coleman. I'm a marketing specialist, strategist at Resiliency-4.
Oh, great, thanks for being here.
So, I'm just gonna go down my list quickly.
Yep, please.
And these are just basic solutions for a lot of these topics.
Oh, amazing, thank you.
So, first of all, renewable energy.
Yeah,
I feel that you could, use wind turbines on like actual buildings and using upscale material so that we could stop the waste going into the landfill.
Yeah.
Because that's
yeah,
not gonna happen, so
Problem.
if we don't fix that problem. So like using, plastic, styrofoam to generate, energy.
yeah.
There's also a thing called magnetic generators, these are magnets.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if anybody knows about that, but we use magnets literally to generate free energy. Another solution might be, somehow talking to the gyms and regulating like manual energy just from gyms.
Oh, cool, yeah.
Everyone's, going crazy about health right now, so if we use things that people are doing every day already to
Yeah.
generate energy, that'd be awesome because it's already happening. I don't know in what country this is happening, I'm not sure if it's Japan or China, but I named it the Michael Jackson effect. You know how Michael Jackson was walking on the sidewalk and the lights were coming on?
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
in either Japan or China or some country, like they have pads now that people are walking on the regularly and generating energy.
Electricity, oh, cool.
All right, so we might want to do that. We have a bunch of highways and we could use the aqueduct effect, which means like whenever it's raining, we just add turbines on whatever's going down. You get what I'm saying? So like, say on top of roofs, triangles, the water's already going down. If we make some type of engineering system that
Yeah.
is turbines somehow, whether it's inside of the gutters or like within the roof system.
Yeah.
That's another way to generate energy. As far as filtering system, the water pins that you could drink in turn of like bad water into drinking water.
Oh,
Have you seen these
yeah.
filters?
Yeah,
We could use that effect as well, like for filtering things. Who knows about Kirby the vacuum cleaner? They have the best filters in the world.
no,
So if we could use that at the beginning, the middle, and at the end of emissions, it's the best filter in the world, literally. So we could probably regulate that in some way
yeah,
as well. Another way to generate energy was, like use everyday things that we use to create energy, like the flushing of toilets, turbines again, somehow in the system. Opening and closing of doors.
Mm.
These are everyday things that we use. So for the port, like to clean the port, I'm not sure if anyone see it, but you probably YouTube it or Google. There are these new yellow buoys that are like, I don't know if they're way down, but they're at the surface, they're right at the surface of the water, and they filter any debris that goes in. I don't know if you guys- So we could put that every 25 to 50 feet or however you guys decide to regulate that. And it's an automatic system that doesn't have to be manual with labor, and people could just go,
yeah,
periodically dump on, turn right back in. And last one, and then as far as the education, I just feel like it needs to, start even earlier than just high schools, even middle schools and elementary schools. We all know that, from birth all the way to 5 to 7 years old, kids are sponges.
yeah,
So once you teach these things, it's gonna be second nature.
yeah.
And I believe that would help, a lot, and that's why I have.
Oh, that's awesome, thank you so much.
Very well.
Thank you.
Yes, that's what Greg signed up. Greg, you want to give your comment now?
Sure. I'm Greg Garrett, I live in Providence, and, it's really interesting to hear all of this, and I've been following it pretty closely, because it wasn't anything particularly new. But, the changes, the changes in how the export markets and
Yeah.
import markets are gonna work. I don't think anybody could put that in a plan, it's just almost beyond belief, and, we have 100% tariff today and 0 tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And
Gonna be
the
flexible.
other thing is in keeping with our city, which we really appreciate, is that we have all these issues around diversity that are included in the plan. Between saying those things and then the cuts to EPA and all the other things, who knows if there will be any federal money to do anything? At least for the next year and a half, absolutely not.
Yeah.
If it says diversity in it, then that plan is off, the Fed won't look at it.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have those kinds of issues, which is really, kind of, nobody could have anticipated. And I hope that the city stands strong, tell that clown in Washington to go stick it. Because he's basically trying to kill people.
Yeah.
And there's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. You look at that, millions of people are gonna die from this guy.
No. 100%.
And, but we should not be changing our city plans because, that's all.
Thank you, Greg. Grant, you didn't get here in time to sign up. Did you have public comment?
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for my vote. I woke up this morning and I didn't have my vote. Never. So, some of you were creating from before. Reiterate this until. If they do words, you know what I'm gonna talk about. The bridge. Year and a half ago, it was told the bridge is substantially repaired. And a year and a quarter ago, it was told that it would be unrepaired. Right now, we have bridge needs to be replaced. The one that was there originally, way back when I was born. And it did the job. And it was only when we built Interstate 95, initially built products. With 3 lanes in each direction, no shoulder, it's fine. We're going with, years later, someone decided, oh, let's relocate the 95. And so we relocated south where it was originally. The longer bridge over the Broadway. Then decided to build a parallel station to the bridge in Washington. Well, that parallel station, the Washington Bridge is what we're using now. What is it? 3 lanes in each direction, for sure. If we build a bridge next door to it, what will that mean us? That will gain us 1 lane in each direction, or a fraction of time. And how much of that cost? What's the minimum cost? Back in better. Take it back. Dollars. My statement. See that. I think that. Here's an opportunity. Back in the 70s, we enacted environmental laws, came up with EIS, environmental taxations. We thought we would have had as part of the backage laws that it's private, was going to cost more than, and I'm around figures in that. I think it's going to cost $150 to do EIS. We didn't do that, so now it's sort of which one. I think this is the ass stuff. I'm going to say, to now prepare the proposed action, that is, no action. And ultimately, it's like red. Not just red from Providence, these Providence. The red from Providence, these Providence, they didn't mind the good side, the guy from one crystal. Wasn't built down before, connecting down that Providence, down that before Providence. I like the most economic impact of that. Before we signed contract, said, normally there would be enough. Bridge of the game is one way to direction. That's all I'm asking. Not that we take a position on whether that's the way to go or not, whether we're able to go or not, but simply get the information, get the numbers, on verbally information, have better decisions made. Why do we think there's the viable opportunity? Because most of the rail infrastructure is there already. And almost all of the right is there. We ought to pay attention to what we have as far as existing resources concerned. And go there, and then sit down and have an informed discussion, informed conversation. Then we can decide what is most appropriate, logical, feasible, and in the spirit of climate change. Global warming. Carbon emissions, whether it's income, transportation sector. What is the most development path to pursue? So that's my request. It is to have a city of the state don't sign a contract. So we get EIS, environmental impact statement, or the EIS, economic impact statement. So that's my request. Is
Thank you, Grant. Awesome. Will you please read item number 2 into the agenda, and also know we have Kevin Croft instead of Priscilla.
Update on sustainability projects reserve account under the Providence tax exemption agreement. Presentation by Kevin Croft.
Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin Croft, Deputy Director of Sustainability. Thanks for having me tonight. I don't have like a presentation or anything.
Yeah. But we have your memo. Oh, do I have to enter this as an exhibit?
You can, there's 2 of them.
Oh, there's 2 of them.
There it is.
What's
The
the
other
second
one,
one?
I think it's part of something.
Yeah, one is just the tax exempt ordinance and the other is.
Page on the.
Oh,
packet.
in the thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So it's just, can we enter them together? Okay, then we enter, page 2.2.B of this, as exhibit 2. Can I have a motion for that?
So move.
Can someone second, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, all in favor. Thanks. Okay, great. Motion, Councilwoman Anthony made the motion, Councilman Roy seconded, and it passed. Thank you. Kevin, take it away.
Okay, so I am here tonight just to provide an update on the
Thank you, yeah.
sustainability reserve account. That was created by the tax exempt ordinance related to Providence. So this ordinance passed a couple of years and now years ago now. It was associated with the extension of the 30-year lease for Providence, and it created an account called the Sustainability Reserve Account, whereby 1% of the revenue from Providence operations is deposited into a account earmarked for sustainability projects. And sustainability projects has a specific definition in the ordinance, which is showing environmental sustainability projects as provided in the master plan, including but not limited to air quality testing, environmental remediation, or projects to advance climate adaptation, mitigation, infrastructure. The amount of revenue that goes into the account annually, can't be less than $120,000 by ordinance. But in the first year of the account's existence, about $150,000 was actually deposited into that account because the 1%, but revenue was greater than that minimum amount that's required by the ordinance, which is great. The funding, I think, accrues quarterly, so there's already more money since that first year has gone by, and I think there's something close to like $250,000 or $300,000 in the account. The funding is really supposed to be based on or the decisions about how the funding is spent is really supposed to be, let's say, informed by the Providence master plan, which we heard about tonight in detail. Thank you, Kevin. That plan should include and will include a list of project categories, project ideas that this funding is designed to go towards. So the MPAC meetings, the community meetings, I think have each had an opportunity for residents and participants in that stakeholder process to recommend the types of projects they want to see this funding spent on. That's what it'll be spent on. So again, going back just kind of like the language of the ordinance, the level set at the beginning here, the sustainability project reserve account is distributed or administered by the city's Office of Sustainability, which is the office that I'm the deputy director of. Priscilla Daly Cruz is the director. And it mentions in consultation with the Sustainability Commission to determine what those sustainability projects are and how that money is spent. So that consultation word kind of leaves a lot of ambiguity about what the role of the Sustainability Commission is in administering or maybe not administering, but playing a role in choosing what the projects and types of projects that this money is going to be used for. Recognizing that the Sustainability Department and the Sustainability Commission, just again, for everybody in the room, is an 11-member volunteer kind of commission or board of the city that offers guidance on the city's sustainability agenda. So the Sustainability Office is the staff to that commission. So the Sustainability Office and the Sustainability Commission have been working over the past few months to determine what that consultation role looks like. And you have a memo which was entered in as an exhibit today, I believe, dated February 4th and updated February 27th. That kind of describes the process that we've gone through and where we've landed in terms of what that consultation process will look like. In short, the Sustainability Commission would like to create a subcommittee that would, of about 5 of the members, I believe it'll be, that will meet kind of on an annual basis to look at the Providence master plan and what those project recommendations were, look at the kind of current priorities of the community and the city, and in partnership with the Sustainability Department, come up with the ideas that we want to spend the money on in that given year. The Sustainability Department or office would then, I think, in partnership again with the commission to make sure we get it right, we develop an RFP for people to submit proposals to achieve the goals of those projects and ideas. And the Sustainability Department would be responsible for kind of ushering that through the normal city procurement process. So going to the Board of Contract and Supply, soliciting bids, proposals and bids, and then doing the selection process. And the selection process, of course, would go back to that subcommittee of the Sustainability Commission, who would, review all of the, proposals, along with kind of designated members in the sustainability office, and choose the projects that are best suited to meet the goals of the, project categories or types in that given year. I think in here it says that they would select kind of leading contenders, maybe one or two that they feel strongly about, and one or two alternates, and then bring that, those recommendations to the full Sustainability Commission for review and a vote. And then it'd be, mainly based on that vote, that the selection, of the proposals would be made. And then again, the Sustainability Department would kind of take over from there, go back to box with a letter of award, and then, enter into the, applicable agreements and administer the project on behalf of the city. So that's, kind of a high level summary of, what the commission and the department have been working on. I think that the commission has, an additional, goal of kind of, so first of all, just converting this more from a memo form to a policy form, which we've got drafted. It felt a little bit like we're getting ahead of them if we shared that with you tonight, because they'll see it
Oh, no, that's
a
fair.
week or so. But it's basically this in a different format, right? But I think that the commission is really interested in some way codifying, the process that they come up with, whether that's, through the establishing ordinance for the commission, which a couple of you have, participated in, developing and amending over the years. Or including in an updated climate justice plan, which we'll be working on, but just so that there's continuity over time about what the process is like. Knowing that there's always turnover on the commission and city staff and administrations and city council. So just to be able to hand this off cleanly from, one group of people to another as time goes on. I think that's mainly what I wanted to share, and I'm just happy to take any questions that you guys have, on anything.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah. Councilwoman Hicks.
Kevin, it's really well thought out. Thank you. I really appreciate the work you've done on this. And my only question is, are you, the amount of money that's coming in, are you anticipating that you'll do yearly? Are you going to require yourselves to do yearly, grants, or would you let them accumulate? So it's a larger sum that might be able to do a larger project, or what is your thinking around that?
Yeah, I think either is an option. I know that when the, reserve account was new, a number of the, commissioners were really enthusiastic about just getting the money out to, community organizations that are doing really good work, in those neighborhoods. And not kind of hoarding it and then giving it all to one, bigger out of town consultant to do like a project. So I know that there's that inclination on the commission. But then there's also obviously there's a benefit if there's a larger project and you can let the money build up for a couple of years. That could be a benefit. Another thing that Wayne has pointed out over the course of the Providence planning meetings is that we could also use this money to leverage other money. As grant match. I think that grant match has kind of gone away in the era of the bipartisan infrastructure law and then the Inflation Reduction Act. But I think that that'll come back as those funds kind of phase out over time. And we'll be looking at, if we want to do a project, we need to come up with a 10, 15, 20% match. And this could help with that. It could also potentially leverage more private foundation funding, where it's just kind of maybe a buy one, get one free, right? Rather than okay, if you do these federal or state grants, oftentimes it's you have to have a very specific project. Oftentimes it doesn't end up going to one big consultant. And, but I think a private foundation might be open to hey, we've got this pot of money and we're trying to do this good work in community organizations. For every dollar we spend on a community organization, can you match it $1? Something like that. I think that could be an attractive proposal. So I think that it's to be determined. Anything's allowable, and I don't think we don't need to.
Well, good. I'm just hoping you don't box yourselves in.
Yeah.
because everything you've just mentioned is a wonderful idea, and then to give yourself the flexibility to entertain all those ideas, I think is really important.
Can I just say, I sit in on those sustainability meetings, a lot of thought goes into it.
It's great.
Kevin, in terms of timing, so you guys are waiting for the Providence master plan to be done and then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, so we are, the reason that we're doing this now again is because the commission is being kind of smart and proactive, so that it's not like the plan gets passed and then we start this process.
Yeah.
Right, so they were really adamant about starting this conversation, figuring out what their consultation goal was. I think that they'll probably vote in the April meeting, which will be next in 2 Mondays, to create this smaller subcommittee so that they're really just ready to roll when the plan's approved. I think they would even begin to meet as a subcommittee before the plan is approved, when there's a draft out. Because I think, you know, it'll be close enough to what's final that they can kind of start to at least be brainstorming about this. And then when the plan is actually finalized, be able to make a decision quicker to start using this money for good uses.
Cool, this is awesome. I know a lot of folks have been asking what's going on with the various 1% revenue thing.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful just to have the update of like, where it's at, so much good thought, yeah.
Yep, yeah, it's a little stuck just in the planning process, but I don't think that that's,
It's a good stuff.
yeah, it just is what it is. It's gotta work its way through that process. Yeah. I'd also just like to, I heard, you know, Priscilla get some credit tonight and, myself, but, Sophie Worsham has just been like, great, and I got sent on this kind of stuff. She, you know, is the one that has been putting together these memos, specifically on this issue for the, commission. But also Kevin was talking about the good work that, we've done to try to help, share sustainability's priorities, both from the climate justice plan and what was added to the comp plan, with the planning team, which we're really grateful. It's been a great partnership with Kevin and the whole GZA team really, and planning and Chris have been really receptive to conversations with us. We feel really included, but it's definitely the kind of work that we've been able to do because Sophie is able to really sit and focus and put time into this, and she does a great job and deserves credit for it.
That's awesome. Thank you for shouting her out.
Yeah.
Any final questions, Councilman?
Yeah, I do. Hi, Kevin.
Hi,
Thanks for all you do.
sure.
So it also calls for the council person for Ward 10 and Ward 11 to be consulted on this. Has anybody reached out to council person, Mary Kay Harris?
The council people has been at the Providence planning meeting, but I think it is a good idea to invite them to the sustainability commission meetings. We can do that.
That's according to the ordinance. It says that the master plan shall provide that a council person for Ward 10 and Ward 11 a consultant regarding community benefits and sustainability projects in their wards. And I don't believe that Council Harris has been to any of this or has been invited to participate in anything pertaining to anything that's going to be.
Yeah. Thank you for putting that.
Let's not forget that part, that's part of the ordinance. And this all has to come back to the council, so is that within the timeline? Because it goes back to the council has to approve this whole plan.
The
Yeah, that-
Providence master plan,
Yeah,
I think maybe
that was in their timeline. It was, I
that's
think
the
they
last
said
step
July.
of the master plan.
Yeah.
Have it approved by city council.
We have
And
reached out
that
to
meeting
her
will be
office.
open to public comments too, so we could get some
I think
public
you
comment
have,
changes or
Kevin
council
saying it.
changes at that final hearing, and then they'd say.
So that needs to be a public hearing is the last one, because we
Right.
need to make sure that then it gets to
But I-
council to get referred to a committee, so. that'll
But I
probably-
think that before it gets before the full council, the conversation is to be had with the council people.
I think that Kevin and the GZA team have invited the council people to participate in the Providence planning meetings. And I think it is a good idea to have them at the sustainability commission meetings too, if they'd like to attend those, and I can certainly
I
extend that.
haven't seen Councilor Harris, I've been there, I haven't seen Councilor Harris, and
She's busy, but-
just because she happens not to be able to make it to those meetings.
We tried to go to her, like, so we tried to contact her office directly, but I take this point very well. We should continue, go to her office at any time to meet with any of her members, any other council members. I also think it's very important, like, this is a very important forum. And
Yeah, and there was a couple of public hearings there was a couple of meetings that was set at the same time that we had.
yeah, of course, council members are very busy. I
Of
don't,
course, but not that.
Yeah.
Especially like last meeting that was held. the
Yeah.
last public hearing. That was last Thursday.
yeah, so what we'll do is we'll try to reach out directly to her, but I also think it might be important to brief the council, those members that are, available in advance of a hearing, so we can get their input holistically as well. We had discussed that internally. Director Mulligan had suggested it. I strongly support that. I don't think that it's wise to present something cold to a bunch of council members that have not seen the details. But we will definitely reach out to Harris's office directly, go to her, any opportunity to brief her. I really appreciate the recommendation.
Awesome, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Just to finalize my point, I think that the conversation with the council people for those wards needs to be something aside from just a community meeting. Which depends on whether they can be there or not. I think there should be a separate meeting as the representatives of those wards, a critical part of this in order for it to be able to work.
And Councilmember Espinal, I think as well for you, we would like to offer that to you as well, so to directly, sit down with you, because you've attended a bunch of meetings and you've been at the impact from the beginning, but we haven't sat down and done a one-on-one with you. So I think that would be very important as well.
I think so too. Thank you.
Yeah.
We can chat more about because I think it says June, July, but if that's when it gets transmitted to council versus I prefer, we can talk about those logistics at that time too.
You go to recess in August, right?
Yeah, we recess for August, but usually the process, we invite you here today, we're so excited you're here, thank you so much, because it's like the committee that really cares about this work, and many of our council people also care about it, but for it to be transmitted to council, if you do want to have a public hearing, it has to get referred to a committee, so there's like a little bit of a two-step situation, but we can talk. Kevin knows that. Awesome. Any other questions, Councilman Reyes? Do you have anything? No, I didn't. We on spot, so I'll make sure you have.
No, I guess not.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and for all this amazing work. This seems really, really exciting. So, if you
Priscilla, I'm going to send you a summary of those performance standards right now. So
that'd be amazing. Thank you, Kevin.
You got it. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you do have trouble connecting to Councilwoman Harris, we can make sure that you're connected with our chief of staff, June. Who can help with that as well. But if there's no further business, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Right.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.
I was gonna abstain. But-
You were gonna abstain?
Yeah.
Have a nice